Welcome to Undershore Podcasts.
Today we are discussing Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi.
Today's question of the day is, if you could adapt your life into a graphic novel or movie, which would you choose?
I'd definitely pick a movie.
I'm going to go a little off track from the question, and I'm going to say I want a musical because I want people to pay more money to see my life because I'm worth that much.
Okay, and I'll go with graphic novel. So all these mediums are very different.
Yeah, and you see these different mediums being adapted to different things. Like both Persepolis and Fun Home are graphic novels, but one was adapted into a movie while the other was adapted to a musical.
Mm-hmm. And I think different things have different values to the story. Like with Persepolis, I didn't think the movie would be any different from the graphic novel because it already started out as a storyboard. But there's a lot of differences, and it's interesting to see what changes are made, but also what kept the same, because in any adaptation, there's some changes that need to be made, but sometimes those changes can be good if you get the right actor for the right part of a movie. It can still be as good as the book.
Right, and one of the benefits of having Persepolis be also an animated movie is that all the character designs are very similar to what it was in the graphic novel. So just by looking at a character, it's like they're already true, in a sense, to the graphic novel.
Yeah, I put that in my notes when I was taking during the movie, that I could really tell who was who without them speaking, and that was an added thing to the movie because they didn't have voices before.
Yeah.
But
one thing I noticed about the movie, one of the thoughts that went through my head is are they going to keep it in black and white? Because I thought it was such a very an icon, I guess iconic's the word I'm thinking of, style for Persepolis, and then it started off in color, and I was like, oh, they're doing this, but then it seems like she's remembering in black and white, which I thought was a very interesting thing to do, and I actually really liked it, that how it sometimes goes back and forth with the color. Not too often, it's mostly black and white, but I liked it.
yeah, I really liked that was a use of a flashback. That's a cool movie device that we wouldn't have had before. To put part of it in color in the graphic novel wouldn't have really made sense because you don't see it together with that kind of imaging.
Yeah, and also you have to think of how graphic novels work. If when you print it in black and white, it costs significantly less to produce it. But if you make a movie in color, it's more like you're only spending more money to make it in color. But when you're producing it, it won't cost any more. It won't cost any more money when you distribute it. I mean, but when you distribute a graphic novel in color, it costs more money. So that might be a result of that.
That's a very interesting point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it also adds to the story, because when it's in black and white, the shadows are very in effect, and you could have things that might not look right if it was live action, such as when they're showing the demonstrations and stuff like that, and all shadowy. And if it was in a live action, probably would have been a little different since it was kind of gory in a way. So, but with animation, you could kind of get away with stuff like that.
I think the animation also points to her imagination and the way the story is told. If it was in real actors and stuff, there's parts of it when she talks to God and stuff. How do you cast the God of her imagination? How do you cast certain parts of her imagination that she just kind of drew? It makes it more organic because it takes from what she's done and adds to it, but doesn't take away from it because it was already drawings in the first place.
I feel having everything be drawn, it's all these people existed in real life, so it'd be so hard to cast a person who already exists and have them capture the essence of who that they were. Yeah. But when you're drawing it, you're getting essentially a first account of how Marjane saw these people, how she perceived them, and the role they had in her life, and she has control over that.
Yeah, actor choices are always hard to pick for any movie, I think, and it would be harder because what we're given in the first place is drawings, so they're already images of what the people should look like, so to make them people is kind of harder to match to the audience. The music in the movie was very interesting because it had the same emotional effects that I think the book had and may have enhanced it, and you don't get music with seeing the people on the page from the graphic novel. It's something that we didn't have a basis for before.
I think from a more general standpoint with music and movies, it's like sometimes like it can be used really well to like set a mood. Like for example, if you take How to Train Your Dragon, they had like a lot of really good moments in that movie where it's like it was just the music, no talking, and I think like it's so different when you see that like in a graphic novel, because you're just, if you have like silence in a graphic novel, it's just a bunch of pictures and it might not like sink in as well as in a more like combination of the sound and the animation from a animated movie like Persepolis.
Right, and the music is just, its significance, like even when there is silence, it proves a point. It's silent on purpose. Of course, you could put on music while you're reading a graphic novel, but it's not the same as being in this like immersive experience of sight and sound and just all at once. You're in the movie, you're in the moment, you feel what Marjan is feeling, you're really just going through her life as she is as a character. It's like you're her in some parts of it.
I thought that's what makes reading the book and seeing the movie kind of hard, because she went through so many hardships. But there are positives as well. There's both in that's life, but to be immersed in that world in a time where it's war is kind of hard to relate to, I would think, because we're not exactly in the same circumstances. But then we have the parts where she's just rebellious and she has the metal and the punk phase, and that's very relatable. So that's what makes her story interesting to listen to and read, look at, everything.
I've been thinking of that scene with when her neighbor's house gets like blown up, and she sees like the like her friend's arm and the bracelet. I don't know. When I watched the movie, I felt it didn't have as much of an impact as it did when I like read the book. I can't really figure out why. I want to know if you guys have any ideas about why I feel that way.
Right. I think it's just because in the graphic novel, there was a whole chapter dedicated to the Baba Levis, the name of the family that whose house got blown up. There was a whole thing about kind of their own backstory and how Marjan like talked to like the girl and their just relationship as neighbors. So you got that backstory in a way, so you could sympathize more with that. When you just see another house blown up in the movie, it's just kind of, yeah. I mean, of course it's like, it's saddening and like kind of horrific, but you just don't really get that personalized feel.
Yeah, I would agree that the part of the drawback that I found in the movie was the pacing, that they cut parts of it out, and those parts are what get you connect with the story as a whole. The longer it is, the more you have time to connect. And when you read a graphic novel or a book or anything, you have the time to digest it and to sit with it, versus like the movie just keeps going. So it's got to keep time and it's got to keep pacing.
Yeah, it's a real shame that like movies can get very limited by the amount of time they can spend on something. Because I felt like a lot of the time while watching the movie, it felt like I got really disappointed when things weren't mentioned, because I thought they were a lot more significant than I guess the people making the movie thought they were. They thought it was able to cut it out and still keep the movie having the same tone or whatever. But I just feel like the movie like lost a bit when things like that were like cut.
Yeah, they sped up when she moved houses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those sort of things. I noticed that they still kept the grandmother relationship, which I appreciated, because I thought that was a large part of the book, that she has this relationship with the grandmother. And, you know, we saw the same sort of scenes with when she soaks herself in cold water, and when she'll be the first disciple, because she wants to get rid of pain and all that stuff. I found that interesting, that that's a part that they kept, and just they did the scenes very accurate to the book versus a lot of the other parts.
Right, like, for example, while the grandmother's relationship is there, her parents' relationship, while, I mean, you could sort of see is there isn't really as emphasized as much. Like in the graphic novel, her mother visited her in Europe, but in the movie they didn't really show that at all. Like they didn't even like mention it really. So it's I guess movie just wanted to show like just like the grandmother more than her parents. Maybe as a grandmother as a sort of like maternal figure. While her parents are of course obviously very important in her life, like with like phone calls and stuff, they kept in contact while she was away. It's just interesting how like some relationships are just seen as more important than other relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like they cut off that whole part, I think, with her parents like sneaking in the posters, and I thought like it gave me kind of like when I read it in the book, I was like, oh wow, they're really not letting anything in the like into this country. Like it's so hard to like get all these cool things that Marjan loves, but like I didn't get a feel for that because they cut that part out in the movie.
Yeah, I thought it was weird that they cut out parts of the parent relationship because a lot of who she is comes from her parents, of that intellectual background, of that background that she wants to go fight and go protest. She gets that from her parents, and we didn't really see that relationship as closely as we see it in the book, and that's where she gets a lot of her predominant traits.
So like after watching the entirety of the movie, I just have to say I didn't really care for the movie. I thought it was pretty badly paced because it's so hard to take a graphic novel and have it go at the same pace as a movie because it just wouldn't flow. And I think this is a good example of it just didn't flow as well for me because there were a lot of points missed and they focused on certain things that I felt weren't as important, and I just think it lost its whole like flow. It felt everywhere, you know?
Yeah, it really was. Especially when she was like in her like love relationships, like that had a lot of meaning to her in the book. It's just that was like her relationships were her life, like romantic relationships. It's just like with Marcus, that went by way too quickly because she stayed with him for basically over a year, and it's like they met and it's just like nothing happened. There was this happy montage, but like it didn't show the full extent of how much like Marcus stabilized her throughout her time in Europe. It's just he was her emotional support, and that's why she kind of felt depressed and out of place without him.
Yeah, like especially like the stuff of her husband. Her husband was barely in the movie.
Right.
Like, come on. Like, I want to know more about him. I want to know why it didn't work, but you just don't get that.
Yeah, it's just kind of like he's there, it doesn't work, so they get a divorce. And it's like, I agree with you on the pacing, but I have to say I kind of like the movie because I guess I always like music and I like movies, but it seemed like it told different parts of the story. Like, the graphic novel had all this in-depthness, and the movie touched on some of it and told it a different way. Kind of like, if it was fictional, then you could say that there were two different movies, but it's kind of different when it's about her life, so they should go a certain way. And I think that's a difference between, like, a book versus a movie in this one, because it's not an audiobook or like an autobiography versus like a fictional story or something else.
Yeah, like I know that things like I know a movie needs to be paced differently, but like I just felt we missed so much of her life, and like there was a reason why it was in the book. It was because it had some sort of importance, and now it's just not there, and it loses it. Like the whole story overall loses something, I think, from it being gone.
Yeah, but of course, the real Marjan wrote the book, but she also had a hand in like kind of directing how the movie goes. So it was like it is her story. Both the graphic novel and the movie are her story because she like made it so that it could be like in the two different mediums. So since it is two different mediums, it's just two different stories in a sense.
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of cool that she got to put her hand in the movie, and you gotta think that means something if she cuts out parts of it or if she doesn't. But there's also like production value and all those kinds of things you could think about that they couldn't produce it because of money.
Part of me is like, the movie, so many more people work on the movie and had a hand on cutting it apart and taking out parts of it. Whereas the graphic novel, there were probably other people like helping her with it, but she had more of a direct effect than the movie overall, because you got the producer, you got the director, you got like a million people like just putting their own vision into this, and not just her. You can't have it solely be she created this movie, because that's just impossible.
Yeah, that's a wrap.
Good job, guys.